although most information about major purchases in the house tends to arrive through the living room, yes, at the time, we're talking 90s, remember, it was the television that delivered advertising to you. But the place where people actually made the decisions was the kitchen. Either sitting around breakfast or washing up or cooking or whatever. That's where the decision process took place. So lots of people were interested in finding ways of getting information to people in the kitchen. So it's something that never really came to pass. I think the mobile phones kind of came and took that space instead. But we were connecting fridges to the internet back in 1996. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of good reasons to connect a fridge to the internet, but ordering milk isn't one of them. Getting a warning when your vaccines are about to go above temperature and spoil, absolutely. Finding out that your £6,000 of delicatessen food in a high-end shop is about to spoil because the compressor's packed in. Yeah, all great reasons to connect to the internet, but buy your own milk. The other consortium we had was a high-tech toys. We did this, the first digital camera for kids. Bear in mind, in 1996, I didn't have a digital camera. This was a very low-cost device, printed out onto fax paper. The whole thing was, I think, about $36 retail price, which meant that we had to make it for about $3. And if anyone who's into electronics will appreciate that getting an imager, a processor, some memory, a print mechanism, all for $3 is pretty tough going. While out of these two consortia, there was a common need, because the people doing the high-tech toys had great interest in connecting the toys to the internet, or actually, to be specific, connecting them to the family computer. Because there's a limit to what you can do with $3 worth of processing power. But if you could get a $1 radio link to the family computer and do the processing on the computer, then suddenly toys can become a lot more magical. And we weren't even really thinking about connectivity to the internet those days. I have to say, there were lots of really, really bad, cynical ideas going on, like messages coming through from Barbie saying, "Hey Barbie, hey Jenny, I know it's your birthday next week. Does Mummy know that the new Princess Barbie is available for just $19.95 down at Toys R Us?" Yeah, just to get the kids there, egging their parents on. But thank goodness that didn't really happen. But there was a need for low-cost radio connectivity for both of those things. And the work that we did back then, one part of it turned into a standard 802.15.4, which is the radio that underlies Zigbee, which you'll probably see a lot of buzz in the next couple of years about Matter, if you're into home automation type things. And the other branch of work disappeared into Nokia for a few years, came back out as Wibri, which got rebranded as Bluetooth Smart, which then got rebranded as Bluetooth Low Energy. And that's the type of Bluetooth that we have most of the time on our phones, connecting to things. Anything other than piping audio to your head is probably Bluetooth Low Energy. Now, there's a tendency for always, people talk about Moore's law, and the way it's usually worded is this way round, that every 2 years you can get twice as many transistors on a piece of silicon. You can do do twice as much processing as you could 2 years ago. That's all very well, but what has always interested me far more is what I've branded the reciprocal of this. If you say, what is 1 over Moore's law? And I say it's Less's law. Okay? It is that whatever you could do 2 years ago, you can now do for half the price, half the power, and half the space. And that always excited me more than always pushing the latest levels of performance. And another observation is that roughly every 10 years we get a new generation of computing type device. So I don't know what, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, sort of that many years ago, we were talking mainframes. Then along came the mini computers, then came the personal computers, then came the portables, whether they're laptops or whatever, mobiles, wearables, and what is the next compute platform that we're going to be getting excited about? I don't know. Is it implantables? Smaller, more capable on a given amount of power. So it was always my dream of a computer device was not some wonderful new thing that could give me 8K resolution, 120 frames a second. I was far more interested in something that could become so cheap that we think of as almost discardable. Don't get me wrong, that's not that I think you can just make electronics and have no regard for the planet. It is, I was very well aware that a lot of the things that we were designing and making, were feeding the consumer endless cycle of, oh, what? Oh, you haven't got a Blu-ray player yet. Oh, okay, so your television's not very big. So I'm seeing lots of end consumers going out and becoming almost slaves to this consumer electronics cycle. And we see it again now. So I always felt a bit guilty about being part of this process that was generating a load of stuff, and if I'm honest, quite a lot of the time it was a load of plastic. So another aspect of looking at if things can be so low cost, it then means that you can think about them in slightly different ways. So although I've always worked on high volume, very cost sensitive things, sometimes they are used in applications where you might not think of it as being cost sensitive. We did, I don't have any pictures of it in the presentation unfortunately, a device that used trained honeybees to detect explosives. And this required each bee to be held in a little chamber that kept it warm and did all wonderful things for it. But we needed to make 5,000 of these little bee containers just to keep 2 prototype handheld detector units available. Okay, now when you're talking about something that's angel or VC funded, and you've got to make 5,000 of them just to provide 2 demonstrator units to, in this case, Ministry of Defence, you don't want those 5,000 units to cost 30 quid each. So even with that, we were engineering down to a price. But so the point I'm making here is that by making things low cost, you can use multiple of them, and sometimes you get reliability through redundancy. So I mean, we didn't work on this one, I have to say, but there were systems where military aircraft would fly over parts of a country that they wanted to know about and just fling accelerometer sensors out of the back with radios in, and they would float down, land on the ground, and then self-configure into a radio network. And it didn't matter if half of them got stuck up a tree or fell in a river, because there would be enough other ones to talk to each other and then form a mesh network of sensors. With that, you've got to be thinking about minimum servicing. You don't go out and put each of these down in the field. You can't configure them. You can't do back office stuff and say, okay, that sensor's there. These are sensors. You don't really know completely where they are. They've got to sort themselves out. You can't go and change their batteries, and so on. So one of the phrases was a light switch on every armrest, which was rather than having light switches on the wall. Actually, you want to switch the lights off when you're sitting on your sofa. And if you sit at that end of the sofa, you want to do that. And if you sit at this end of the sofa, you want to do that. And by getting the prices of these things down, it means you can spread them far and wide. I know this is about making things more sustainable. It sounds really bad so far. The other bit, another aspect of what the big reveal will come in a minute, is I like the idea of interacting with computers in a very ambient way. I don't necessarily want something to go ding and tell me something. I don't want it to interfere with what I'm doing and make me go and look at it. Nor do I really want to have to go and press something in order for some information to arrive. So the idea of ambient computing, or ignorables or glanceables, as we've sometimes called them, is that things can just disappear into the background. That's one of the things about Internet of Things. I'm okay with being a thing. I don't mind being a thing as far as the Internet of Things is concerned. If I'm being monitored, say my heart rate or breathing or weight, that doesn't bother me. What I don't want to have to do is keep entering data into it. If it gets on and records things for me, I'm quite happy with that. So I think if you combine those things together, we kind of come up with what we have come to call Internet of Things, generally low cost, large numbers, syncing into the background. The term IoT was actually coined in 1999, but at the time it sort of referred to RFID identification, automatic identification of devices and so on. And it only really started taking on the meaning as we now understand it around about 2006. A lot of startups were treading this ground, and the tool that they tended to turn to was the Arduino. Quick show of hands, Arduino mean anything to a few people? Okay, but the Arduino was originally created for a group of 20 product designers who were going through a course in northern Italy. One of them is a lady I'm now very glad to call a very good friend of mine. And while she was going through this course, she said, actually, I think this little circuit board that was easy to program probably has applications beyond this course. At the end of the I think it was a 2-year course, she moved to London, started selling Arduino kits from her bedsit, and had it not been for her, I don't think we would have the big ecosystem of Arduino that we now have. For those who aren't familiar with it, for those who aren't familiar with it, hold on, there's some pictures of it coming up. I'll explain. It's probably better for me to do it that way. Those from startup world, you've all come across Eric Ries and the Lean Startup, the principle of fail, try it out, fail fast, revise it, and so on. A lot of my clients were doing exactly that, but they had to keep coming back to me to get a bit more programming done, and try as I might to do it fast and at low cost for them, it was inevitably fairly expensive. So what I said to them is, no, go out, spend a couple of evenings, because it really is that quick to get going if you've done a bit of programming with Arduino, and you'll be able to iterate your own products 2 or 3 times a day. Try them out, and you'll end up with much better worked out products, which you can then bring to me to take the cost out or take the power consumption down. So actually, yes. So the lady in question, Alexandra Deschamps-Oncino, was behind this product, which was sort of an iconic product of Internet of Things. I still claim it is the most basic piece of information transfer you can get. Two lamps. The big one goes off to typical use case. Big one goes off to university with one of your kids who is going to study abroad, let's say. You keep hold of the little lamp. These are connected via cellular data, as we would now call it. Whenever the big lamp turns on, the little lamp turns on as well. Whenever the big lamp turns off, the little lamp turns off. Now, whenever I have explained this, almost universally, women get it like that and go, okay, yeah, I understand. Yeah. Blokes almost universally go, yeah, but you can use different colours, so you could have different flash patterns that could mean different things, like share prices going up or football teams having scored. Okay, I am absolutely astonished the gender divide on people who get it and those who don't. Okay, but it pulls together this whole thing. It's ambient. It sinks into the background. And if you think about it as a challenge, it's one bit of data that changes quite slowly. Yeah. As it turns out, it's a really, really difficult job to do that, because these things, you buy them in one location, and to be effective, one of them is going to move many countries away. And if you can find a mobile network operator who will let you connect a device and find a way for it to work in another country where you don't know which frequency band you're going to have to operate on, it was a tough one. I think it was the CEO of Ericsson who is credited or discredited with this quote. Said there will be 50 billion IoT devices, or 50 billion devices connected to the internet by 2020. It didn't quite reach that. I think they got to about 35 billion by 2020. It probably is at 50 billion now. But if you think 50 billion devices over the course of their lifetime, if they average 20 batteries, that's 1 trillion batteries. Okay, little coin cells. They're not they're not a very efficient way of storing energy. They deliver it where it needs to be. Don't get me wrong, batteries are great, but what can we do to reduce that? Make the battery life, make the product better, halve the power consumption, battery life becomes twice as much. Number one, it's a better product. Number two, you've halved the number of batteries that you've wasted. How am I running for time? Okay, I'm going to speed up. I'm going to skip a lot. Various things we did. Okay. So the best ideas come from users. I always say I'm a very strange person. I'm an engineer. Okay? I get excited about things that normal people don't get excited about. I am a really bad judge of what is going to be successful in the marketplace. So the question became, how many people can actually prototype an embedded system? And I would say that 15 years ago, you had rare people who had done a fair amount of computer science and a fair amount of electronics hardware could just about pull together a prototype if they needed to. Or Elector is a magazine for strange hobbyists like me. 15 years ago, not very many people could press ahead and make their own embedded system. Arduino came along, and it's kind of a simplified C++, but it's very friendly and has extensive libraries that are very easy to use. And it took off in a big way amongst the musicians, visual artists. However, they still had to be people who didn't mind learning differences between square and curly brackets and remembering to put semicolons at the end of lines. Now, if you ever try and teach someone to code, that is the point at which you will lose the interest of a very large number of people. Programming languages, easy entry programming systems such as Scratch, and then the Raspberry Pi adopted Scratch as an easy entry way of programming. With the microbit, we took a very similar approach. So you can program it by, if you like, plugging jigsaw pieces together. And what that does is it takes care of the syntax for you, because only certain commands will fit within other commands. Along the way, you actually learn the underlying programming language, because you can switch it from your jigsaw pieces into the code that has been generated from it, be that Python or JavaScript or whatever. The point, though, is that if you get 10 times as many people designing things, you will get a higher quality of product, because you're not just relying on strange people. And the microbit was aimed at originally 7-year-olds, and actually there's big announcement just been made that microbit's now going into primary schools. We actually ended up putting it out to secondary schools because it was easier to deliver that. But something which is targeted for the average 11-year-old is probably about the right level for a lot of business owners to learn as well. A tech-savvy 11-year-old, you're probably about the right level to appeal to to people who don't really want to learn to code. So again, I claim that microbit probably then meant that we were reaching 10 times as many people. So yeah, cynically, no, that's a different slide. I'll come back to that later. Okay. Right, silicon is small. Okay. When you start hearing about 20 nanometer processes and so on, it means that we're getting transistors down to that size, and we're packing millions and then billions of transistors onto a small piece of silicon. And actually, it's the interconnection between those transistors that takes up quite a lot of the space on the silicon rather than the transistors themselves. So this is, that is that, and this is a photo from about 10 years ago. So if you're thinking about the scale involved here, we are probably talking half of those dimensions, if not less now. But it's actually the connections to these devices that kind of limits their size. The more you can do within the chip itself without having to reach out to beyond the confines of the chip, the more you can do. So more and more peripheral type functions get mopped up and put onto the chip. Sensors also moved onto the chip. So the accelerometers that we all have in our phones now, to know which way up they are, or it's been dropped. Your hard disk drive, if it senses free fall, will stop spinning, so that when it does hit the ground, the head won't crash. Forget all that. I've just realised none of us actually have spinning hard disks. Okay, but yeah, I mean that a lot of that development came from car airbags. The cost of an accelerometer 40 years ago was, astronomical. Accelerometers created actually on the chip itself came in primarily for the airbag market, and then we ended up having, there's lots of these other interesting things we can do with them as well. Human scale input takes up space. It's all very well being able to shrink all of these devices down to something a little bit bigger than a coin cell. But have you tried entering a Wi-Fi password on something that big? Yeah. So there's always, you've got to think of different ways of achieving that user interface without it becoming painful. Radios also have been advancing and advancing. They're effectively silicon as well. So they're all following Moore's law of shrinking. So actually you end up with, it's as easy to talk to this thing over radio as it is to put 3 or 4 additional lines into it, and then you've got to provide a keyboard or a display or something like that. Whereas connect to it with radio, you've got your phone, and you've effectively got a very rich user interface without adding any cost to the product. That was another one of the interests of the white goods manufacturers, because it's all very well saying, I want to use a variable rate tariff to do my washing, and you want to distinguish between I want my dishes washed as quickly as possible, or I want my dishes washed at the lowest electricity price before 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. But you try doing that, expressing that over to a user with a twisty dial and a few numbers on the front of a washing machine. So they were actually really interested in removing most of the user interface from kitchen appliances and having you interface via what subsequently became Bluetooth as well. Again, I was convinced that was going to happen. People were telling me it was going to happen. I thought, yeah, that's a really good idea. To the best of my knowledge, it's not really happening as yet. So silicon is cheap, but if you can get away with a bit less silicon, so much the better. Simple silicon, i.e. the silicon that isn't involved in the really leading edge stuff, is generally cheaper than so the slightly older processes, which means that it's a bit bigger, is cheaper than the really small stuff, which also goes faster. And if you're making at least millions of chips, to be honest, you wouldn't make a chip for less than $1 million off, really. Now, ASICs, they are application-specific integrated circuits. This is where you have a device which is made for one very specific job. And the wisdom that gets bandied around is they end up, that's the only way to get to the really low cost stuff. In my experience, and I've been doing this since 1995. I can't think of more than 3 or 4 times where an ASIC has been considered for the kind of things that we do. The reason being that the kind of task we're asking a chip to do is actually quite similar to a lot of other jobs we might ask it to do. So if you can use a general purpose, the more general purpose a processor you can use, you've then actually got the economies of scale of a whole raft of other users. So I have always found it cheaper to use a general purpose microcontroller, which is basically a little computer with all of the things it needs all on one chip. And only on one occasion have we actually gone to a true ASIC, and that was for the camera. And that was just because we needed an imager and some additional logic that would allow us to work with a very low-cost general-purpose microcontroller. So, yes, we do go to ASIC, but generally for reasons other than just cost. It's because it couldn't be done another way. Yeah.
Is there a risk when you go to an ASIC as well, that technology risk that it may not work?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's usually about a 6-figure pounds or dollars risk as well. So yeah, you get very nervous when you sign it, but that used to be the case anyway with microcontrollers, because the lowest cost memory was what we call masked ROM, as in the program you sent off, and about 3 weeks later you would get 50,000 or 500,000 chips permanently programmed with that code that you had sent off.
Right.
Okay. And you.
That's scary.
Exactly. Yeah. That moment when you press compile and it all works, you go, oh yeah, it's fine then. Yeah. Ship it. The Fisher-Price camera project, we had 750,000 chips programmed, and then one of my colleagues discovered there was a bug in what he'd created, and had a very uncomfortable conversation with the client at Fisher-Price. Unfortunately, we tried to rescue the project for the sake of these 750,000 devices by altering the rest of the electronics to make it misbehave in such a way that the code would then work properly. What we should have done is said, okay, that was an unfortunate mistake. dump them in Hong Kong Harbour, and go around and do the process again. So we spent more money trying to rescue it in that other way than. Right. Sorry. This is the slide that I really wanted to get done today, because I saw an excellent presentation a few years ago at Cranfield by Herman Hauser. Herman Hauser mean anything to anyone? No? Okay. Correct. Yeah. Going back to BBC Model B days, Herman Hauser was a venture capitalist chap, very brilliant as an engineer, technician, technical person as well. But he was the person who spotted that when Olivetti bought Acorn, and they were pretty much down in the dumps after the BBC Model B. Yeah, the BBC Model B was a great success for them, but chips were not selling. At least they weren't selling if you were a typewriter manufacturer, strangely enough. So Olivetti found that they had this company, Acorn, and Herman Hauser kind of went, well, actually, I think this reduced instruction set computer that they'd developed is pretty promising. And Olivetti went, yeah, okay, well, we don't really care too much about that. So he bought this little company for not very many millions of pounds, I think. And that was originally Acorn, or Advanced Risk Machines, or ARM. And ARM have probably, well, I don't know, it's probably something like 3/4 of the world's processors, all designed in a couple of buildings over in Cambridge, but then manufactured. ARM only designed the chips. They then license the designs for everyone else to sell. But Herman Hauser gave a great presentation on basically the stuff that I'm pretending to talk about here, comparing the performance of the human brain with the latest high-performance computing. Now, if you look at the processing capability of the human brain, we can just about build a computer that can do as much processing as that. But such a computer would consume about 200 kilowatts. We are about 10,000 times more efficient than that in terms of power consumption, because we run on about 20 watts. About 20 watts of energy goes into keeping our brain going. And it actually turns out that's one of the biggest challenges, that you can do more and more, you can get more and more transistors switching, and even though they're becoming more and more efficient, the biggest challenge is getting the heat out of these things. Another limitation on what you can do is actually the speed of light. A processor running at 3 gigahertz, which is fairly commonplace now, by the time it's done one operation, light will have only travelled about that far. Okay. Now, electricity travels at approximately speed of light. Yeah. So, if you've got a processor any bigger than this, you can't. Yeah, you can't run it any faster than that. The only way you can go faster is to go smaller. So what already is happening, and what the trend that we probably expect to see, is many, many small processors on a piece of silicon, surrounded, each of those processors surrounded by memory, because then those can work on the very short distances involved. The signals can pass, and okay. So what I think Herman's latest investment at the time, which was, well, it was pre-lockdown, so it must be 4 or 5 years, was a company that had just put 7,000 processors, each of them with about 600 meg. So actually, each of them a very capable processor. 7,000 of those on a single chip. I'm not a massive fan of AI, I have to say, but the kind of algorithms that are run on that lend themselves very well to having lots and lots of cores and spreading the task amongst them. So that's probably the direction things will go in. The other key point, though, is that connections, the human neuron typically has about 1,000 inputs, and it's the weights on all of those inputs that cause it to fire or not fire. And we're only really now discovering what it is that makes a not huge number of neurons running at not incredibly fast. Okay, so we're talking, kilohertz at best, compared with transistors that can be operating at billions of times per second. It's actually all having that very large number of inputs that brings this efficiency. Okay. I did find his presentation, and anyone who's interested in this stuff, I highly recommend it. I completely forgot to put the link in there. I will forward it so that it's in if anyone wants it. Okay. I think I'm going to skip a few bits here. The too long didn't read version of this is operating systems are great. They consume more energy for the same job than smaller operating systems or operating systems that are tailored for very fast production, very fast operation. Schedulers are really, really stripped back equivalents of operating systems. Again, they're more efficient. It's great having all of these things that an operating system gives you, but they come at a cost. There's an overhead. And actually, most of what we do is what we call bare metal programming. Yeah, if we want a scheduler, we have to write a scheduler. If we want it to be a real-time operating system, we have to extend that ourselves to make it a real-time operating system. So actually, most of what we're doing is actually, you can see the whole code of the whole computer typically on one sheet of paper, which I love. I don't like if I've got more spare bytes at the end of a project than I've got fingers, then I have wasted space in my thinking. Okay. There's a term we use in low power radio called always off. You've heard of always on, as in this has to work for 99.999% of the time, and to a first degree of approximation, 99.999 is always on. By the same token, most of the radios that we work with are always off. Okay? They wake up, they do a tiny little job, then they go back to sleep. and they spend the vast majority of their time asleep. So we're always fighting to make sure they consume very, very little power while asleep, and that they're very good at waking up quickly, doing their job, and then getting back to sleep really quickly. The thing is, however much people talk about low power radio and so on, there's no such thing as low power radio. We already explored the limits of how much energy you need to transmit a bit a certain distance. Yes, we're making some marginal gains still on that, but fundamentally, when you're doing radio, you're trading off range, i.e. how far you can send, how fast you can send, and cost, power consumption. There's no wonderful new gains to be had by more advanced radio. More advanced radios cost more money, but they don't. We're not going to suddenly wake up in 5 years' time and find that it costs less energy to send a certain amount of data. Power consumption of dynamic memory is horrendous from our point of view. Just the way dynamic memory works is if you don't refresh it, it forgets. So the large amounts of memory that you'll all expect to have in what we think of as computers will be dynamic RAM. It will be constantly churning away, and if you've built your own computers, you'll know that heat extraction from around the memory is a key factor. Most microcontrollers, the stuff we're working on, will use static memory, which is about 6 times the size of dynamic RAM. So you pay more silicon area, you may pay more cost per byte, but it stays there forever as long as power is still there. These are memories which will retain their memory even with power removed, but they are slower to write generally, possible exception there, and consume many times the amount of energy as it does to store something into static or dynamic RAM. Again, this is a mobile phone data application. It connects, it changes, it transfers some data, and then it will just keep checking in to say, oh, have you got anything else for me? You got anything else for me? But the only way for the kind of devices we make to get long battery lives is to then go into deep sleep mode, i.e. in effect completely shut down. Some of the new types of cellular data that we now have access to, again, they're not making some wonderful new advance in radio. The big advance in power consumption has been that we can now ask the network to remember us and say, we're going to sleep for 10 milliseconds, we're going to sleep for 3 minutes, or we're going to sleep for, I think the maximum is 310 hours. And what that means is you've got a scheduled time when you're going to wake up, and the network will expect to hear from you at that point. You don't need to rejoin. And to give you an idea, while transmitting, this particular device will be taking 110 milliamps. When we're in kind of standby, occasionally checking, our power consumption goes down by about a factor of 100. And when we go into a deep sleep mode, our power consumption goes down by another factor of about 250, 300, something like that. But because we spend a lot of time in sleep mode, that ends up being quite an important factor. Again, very summarised version. Choice of protocol that you use for doing some of these data transfers can have a big impact on power consumption of the whole device. Simply sending JSON, as in, normally in alphanumeric form, is wasteful compared with sending the binary encoded version. So what is actually happening here is we are relying upon devices in the network to allow us to talk to them from our end device in a very, very compact, low power binary form. And then up here, where this broker is actually going to talk to the real internet, it says, well, what that end device actually meant to say is this big long string of JSON.
So Lawrence, what's that service doing at the end, the AWS, to its customer back in the
Okay, so I think what that's saying is, this is what you think of as your server. And for example, it's an AWS account, could be whatever else. But MQTT is one of the formats that a lot of back-end communication takes place over, and even 10 years ago, we would have been happily we would have been talking MQTT direct to this. What this is saying is this service, because this is an advertising slide for someone once. This is saying that they actually save that much energy by, if you like, acting as a bridge from the kind of communications that we would prefer to use for low power, and translate that into what is expected by Amazon, Azure, or whatever at the back end.
What's sorry.
Yep.
What are Zigbee and those guys using? Are they using co-op at the?
So you can put various formats. So I mean the thing to remember is Zigbee is only a relatively short range communications system.
Right.
Yeah, we're talking sort of 100 meters with the wind behind it.
Yeah.
Downhill. Originally Bluetooth, we were talking 10 meters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whereas with in this particular case, with cellular, we're talking about going all the way from your device to the network cell tower, which could be kilometers away. Yeah. So with Zigbee, you're kind of operating in a predefined use case. So a lot of if like Zigbee profiles, and whether you come across Zigbee cluster libraries and so on. What it's saying is, when I say 7 in this context, it means that it's 7 degrees. Yeah. Whereas if you imagine without having the context predefined, you would have to say the temperature is 7 degrees C, which is obviously a lot more verbose than just being able to say 7, 4, 13, which might mean it's 7 degrees, turn the gas on to 4 out of 10, and whatever the other number was, is humidity or something like that. So if Zigbee, because it is targeted at a particular application, and they have
Right. You've
written
got
all
data
the
modelling
profiles.
as well as data communication capability.
Yeah.
Right. And so that, are you saying that's a long range data communication rather than data modelling? The co-op.
Co-op is, it achieves much the same. Co-op is UDP based, if that means great deal to people. MQTT is TCP based, so that is a connection type system. Co-op is more user datagram. Actually, there's mechanisms which make co-op behave a lot more like a connection based system.
Right.
But that's seriously deep tech stuff, which I might get to dangerously boring to almost everyone else.
Lawrence, just before you start this, I'm a bit worried about the time. You said you've got to be away by 7. It's about 8 minutes to.
Well, okay, right. In that case,
I thought I'd better mention it.
Yeah, I'm just going to skip forward and see whether there's anything that you really want. I really want you to see. Anyone who's interested in getting started, by all means, drop me a line and I'll point you in the right directions. But if you're used to programming big computers, the type that general home computer type stuff, you might think of the Raspberry Pi as an incredibly low power device. I promise you it's not. It's probably going to be consuming a few watts rather than tens or a couple of hundred watts. But it's still probably say a Linux class device. It's something that wakes up, boots a huge operating system relative to what we're used to. You can think of perhaps the processing power as equivalent to sort of a 5-year-old laptop, that sort of thing. And when I say they do not sleep quietly, you can't put one of these things to sleep and consume only a few microamps. They're dynamic memory based. They consume a load of power just to remember what they were doing.
Lawrence, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
We've only got you for a few more minutes.
Sure.
There's a sort of a punchline out of this, which I really would like to know, because what you're saying is that you're describing how IoT devices can be cheaper,
Yeah.
cheaper, lower energy, so the impact on them is going to be better. Longer life as well.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Right, but the opposite to that, presumably we're just getting more and more of them. What's the net effect looking like over the next sort of 10, 20 years? I mean, is there a sense of that at all?
So, I've got I'll just go into opinion here. I think. Do you remember the dot-com bubble? Yeah.
Very well.
Yes. Where it was almost unfashionable to be making money. Yeah. All that mattered was how many members, how many users you had. Yeah. And we'll worry later about why that's a good idea or not. Okay. One of the things I was going to show you was the underpants gnomes from South Park. Anyone familiar with that? I'll put the link in as well. The punchline of it is these little gnomes steal underpants. When they say, "What are you doing? What are you doing with these underpants?" and they explain it, they say, "Phase 1 is we collect underpants. Phase 2 ? Phase 3 profit." Okay. And what I felt was a hell of a lot of that dot-com bubble was people going, oh yeah, we'll get members. We're not quite sure what we're going to do with those members when we get them, but yeah, we'll make profit out of it. And one of my concerns is that we are kind of taking the same approach with data at the moment. We're hoovering up far more. We're hoovering up data and storing it and transmitting it. And if you look at the energy consumption of the various server farms, we are there's two ways of communicating that a red bus has just travelled down the street outside here. Okay, the cameras, the Vivacity, I think it is, cameras that we've got out here are, in the most part, streaming live video, and then somewhere off on a server, this country or somewhere else, is looking at it, doing all of the fantastic AI processing, and saying, yes, that's a red bus, and then sending that information back. By doing that at the edge, so one of the wonderful new bus terms is AI at the edge, which means doing the processing at what they consider the edge. Now, actually, it turns out that a lot of this AI at the edge is actually being done at the cell tower, or like a local processing station, and the distinction is that it's not being sent out onto the big wide internet and many miles away. When I talk about doing things at the edge, I'm talking about at least doing it at the router level, perhaps the Raspberry Pi class device or the Wi-Fi router, doing the processing there. What I'm really interested in is AI at the extreme edge, i.e. it's being done in the camera. Yeah, and just as an example of what are we doing now, because microbit, Nissan Leaf battery storing energy, monitoring elderly people, but this is kind of what we do on a day-to-day basis. Design the electronics, design how it's physically built, build it or get it built, and then deploy it. This is a project close to my heart, tracking beer kegs. Have they been handled properly? Have they got lost? Are they where they're supposed to be? Unfortunately, tucked away under on this lower board is a very clever accelerometer. Now, when I talk about AI at the extreme edge, that accelerometer doesn't even bother waking up the main processor to say that I've got a new reading for you. That accelerometer has its own little machine learning core built into it, which sits there and goes, it feels like I'm in transit on a vehicle. And only if it then detects that the movement has stopped or has changed in its nature, such that maybe now it's being lifted on a forklift, only at that point does it bother waking up the main processor. Now, the design goal for this device was to operate for 5 years on a pair of AA cells. And we weren't actually very aggressive on what we were doing power saving wise on that. But those are the kind of steps that we have to take to get to 10-year type battery lives. And yes, the thing that I really want to get to is the kind of power levels that we are now reaching. It's absolutely possible to energy harvest a lot of these things. And again, then your thinking changes in a big way, because you never have to go and change the batteries. The cost of the batteries is of no consequence really. If you've got to send the van to go and change a battery, actually if you've got to inconvenience your domestic customer to go and put new batteries in their Zigbee light switch even once a year, that is more bother than I'd be concerned about, that I'd be prepared to do. So it's that ubiquity thing, the sinking into the background, getting forgotten about, some of that only comes if you never have to replace batteries. If you never have to put a battery in it in the first place, it actually means that your disposal cycle at end of life is, or hopefully some form of recycle. You open up a whole load of other opportunities there. The batteries, honestly, are one of the biggest pains of my life. I keep telling entrepreneurs, don't use a lithium polymer battery unless you really, really have to, because you're not going to be able to post it. You're not going to be able to post your prototypes around the country. And if you can get away with the power consumption or the batteries altogether, then so much the better. I'm on target to finish at about 9:30, 10 o'clock. So.
I was going to say, are the consequences of you leaving after 7 severe?
I'll be. It's either cat and nine tails, keyhole, or totally sober. So I sing in the sea shanty band, and it's our last rehearsal tonight.
Right.
Boy, do we need it.
Right. Well, listen, I'm going to say I'll cut all the stuff. That's a massive thank you to you, Lawrence. Absolutely brilliant. Please show your appreciation, Lawrence.